Analysis. In what sense may Marcus be regarded as a moral leader? We may now turn to the question, in what sense may Marcus be regarded as a moral leader from the perspectives of theories of transformational and servant leadership? The key aspect of morally transforming leadership, according to James McGregor Burns, is that the leader transcends exchange with others based on self-interests and engage in mutual and continuing pursuit of higher moral purposes or a vision of the common good. From the story that has been presented so far, it seems clear that Marcus has devoted himself to such a moral cause. He wants to serve the city in which he lives, guided by a social vision of the common good that may be grounded in the Christian tradition, but nevertheless seeks to realize public values like meaningful activities for youth and a city with a low crime rate. For this reason, I consider Marcus to be a transformational leader. One might add that Marcus' visionary commitment also is incarnated in corresponding practices over time. Marcus is strongly committed to the development of others, including younger leaders, his co-workers, and less privileged groups like young people in danger of becoming criminals. For this reason, I will also suggest that Marcus may qualify as a moral leader if his story is evaluated from the perspective of Robert Greenleaf's theory of servant leadership. According to Greenleaf, the best test of servant leadership concerns whether those who are being served grow as persons in the sense of becoming healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely to become servants themselves. This criterion applies in particular to the least privileged in society. To establish whether this actually takes place around and through Marcus would require more empirical data. His story nevertheless implies that he is struggling to actually empower others because of his tendency to be consumed by tasks and achievements. Yet his awareness of and attitude towards this problem and his willingness to learn counseling of people seems to express a desire to become a serving leader. It's a version of the thing that Marcus does not present himself as a perfect leader. Marcus is, in theological language, a simul justus et peccator, simultaneously a sinner and a saint. Yes, his commitment to truthfulness and his willingness to change implies that we may see him as an inspiring transformational and servant leader in the making. Moral reasoning that leads to moral, responsible, critical loyalty. Marcus' basic commitments also contribute to the perhaps most interesting moral aspect of Marcus' story. He's capable of reflecting morally on critical tensions in organizational life. The perhaps most fundamental conflict in his story is between organizational tasks on the one hand and that of personal well-being on the other. For Marcus, this is both an individual, interpersonal, and systemic challenge. This is also a challenge to leadership theory. Catherine Patterson suggests that transformational leadership, as it was developed by Burns and extended by Bernard Bass, tends to focus primarily on organizational objectives. This means that the theory emphasizes the good of the organization over the good of the individual members thereof. According to Patterson, servant leadership theory offers an alternative paradigm that focuses on the well-being and individuality of the followers. It follows that leaders must attend to followers and for what is good and right, even when it's not in the financial interest of the organization. I will suggest that Patterson raises an imperative concern, although one might ask how the well-being of the followers should be defined. From a communitarian perspective, one might suggest that the well-being of individuals to a significant degree depends on shared moral practices or forms of life that are orientated towards public common goods. This will also imply that moral individuality to a significant degree depends on communality, although it cannot be reduced to it. Thus, Patterson is correct when she suggests that moral leadership is authenticated by love and empathy towards followers. But the well-being must be considered with a balancing regard to both communal values and long-term social consequences. A more communitarian social ontology may therefore ground a more robust version of servant leadership that is compatible with the paradigm of transformational leadership if organizational outcomes are guided by a vision of the common good. Yet, since conflicting interests exist in communities, sacrifices for the common good may be distributed unjustly. Thus, Patterson's critical concern remains valid. Tensions between the good of the individual and the good of the organization remain a critical issue that calls for constant moral responsible reasoning. Both leaders and followers must seek to balance conflicting interests and pursue integrations of individual and common goods. This is a case of what Roland Heifetz calls leadership, and one might add followership, without easy answers. For this reason, I consider Marcus' critical reflections on the relationship between organizational objectives and his family's well-being as a moral responsibility. Moral leadership will include sacrifice, but these sacrifices should be informed and deliberative. From an ethical perspective, such deliberations might be seen as a form of stewardship of one's individuality in the context of the common good, rather than simply a form of individualistic self-maximizing. Moreover, this kind of self-stewardship should be balanced by the kind of equal regard for his co-workers that Marcus demonstrates in his critical reflections on his own leadership. Finally, Marcus' reflections on a possible paradigm shift in the church also demonstrates that Marcus reflects critically and moral responsibly on the organization strategy in light of greater common goods. These debates are not discussions of organizational outcomes versus self-interest. They are assessment of different moral strategies that share the same overall goals, including the dignity of individuals, a healthy organization, and a flourishing and more peaceful society. Yet, in this debate, Marcus finds himself to be caught in the middle of a power structure. Since Marcus is a middle manager, he tries to initiate legitimate change through dialogue with his superiors. At the same time, he leads others within the present paradigm. This form of critical loyalty is, in my view, a moral virtue that is essential for both Marcus and the organization in which he serves, because it allows critique and yet supports cohesion. Thus, I will suggest that Marcus may qualify as a moral leader in at least three ways. 1. He demonstrates a transformational commitment to a moral cause beyond his self-interest. 2. He's struggling to become a caring and empowering leader towards actual others. And 3. He is also capable of a holistic moral reasoning. He embraces a moral responsibility for the common good, for specific others, for self-stewardship, and seeks to come to terms with tension between these commitments in a way that creates a form of moral, responsible, critical loyalty. How did Marcus become a moral leader? We may now turn to the question of how Marcus became a moral leader. Obviously, I have not sufficient data to present an exhaustive answer to this question. Yet, the story that has been presented so far may still suffice to provide partial insights on how Marcus became a leader with regard to the three key virtues that have been identified. Since these qualities may have common moral sources, I will organize the following analysis in terms of sources rather than in terms of outcomes. Narrative sources, the formation of a transformational and serving identity. I will suggest that it's possible to identify fragments of different horizon narratives in Marcus' story. Horizon narratives are larger stories or discourses that function as hermeneutical horizons for a given person's life story. Horizon narratives also provide hierarchies of concerns in the sense that they tell us what to care about. For this reason, I find it interesting that Marcus chooses leadership and management books when he visits the library. Marcus' struggle to become a successful leader might be read in light of the language that Robert Bellah and his colleagues calls utilitarian individualism, which also have influenced modern leadership literature. This discourse, which might inspire Marcus' struggle to achieve and his tendency to create burnout experiences, is, however, balanced by other horizon narratives in his story. He says, I can be inspired by talent and competence, but I don't follow that unless I sense a heart-to-heart, genuine care and love. But if I see wholeness, an authentic living, an authentic personality, then they can be broken. They can even be having their breakdowns, and they can have their funny sides and maybe even brighter talent in some areas. I get fed up with other leaders that become too much of a machine. Marcus claims that task-oriented competence and success is less important than genuine care and love. In this passage, these qualities are associated with wholeness and authenticity. Seen together with his reflections on the postmodern relational church and his quest for getting most out of life, one might ask if Marcus is influenced by what Charles Taylor calls an ethics of authenticity. This discourse seems to provide Marcus with certain ideas about pure relationships and an image of self-realization as living authentically from one's heart. Yet, while this horizon narrative may contribute to his inner debate on organizational tasks versus people, it's not decisive in terms of defining his ultimate concern. Marcus uses most of his time serving God in the context of a church that seeks to serve its city. When I asked about what it meant to be faithful to God, Marcus answered, "To have that space in my life where God and I are together on a secret level. And also it means integrity, to keep being faithful to life principles from the Word of God, and also to fulfill the calling and the job." It follows that Marcus' self-concept and practice of leadership is anchored in a biblical universe of life principles, to which he holds himself accountable. It follows that it's also reasonable to interpret genuine love and care within the Christian horizon, which is articulated in the New Testament and exemplified by Jesus. The importance of the biblical story is also demonstrated in the way it gives shape to Marcus' self-concept. At this point, I find the way he identifies with the biblical character of Joseph to be of particular importance. The biblical narrative of a teenager who gets the dream also becomes what psychologist Dan McAdams calls a self-character in Marcus' narrative. By identifying with Joseph, Marcus sees himself as a person who might make a significant difference in the end and be rewarded for his hardships. Thus, the Christian story is both formative for his understanding of service and decisive for the shape of his transformational commitments. The sense of a calling, spirituality as a source of moral identity. His choice to become a leader in this particular church cannot be understood properly unless one explores his experience of being called. Regardless of scientific paradigm, it may be possible to agree that Marcus' experience of being called, like Joseph, and the more specific experience of being called to Copenhagen are decisive events that shapes his story. It's also possible to argue that this sense of being called is pivotal for the way he deals with the costs and sacrifices that comes with transformational commitments. Consider the following passage. I'm pretty humble in that way though, salary-wise. I'm from a background where my biggest problem in the first 3-4 years of my ministry was that I didn't feel that I deserved the salary. It was a very small amount of money. It felt it was a kind of holy money. The phrase first 3-4 years of my ministry may indicate that Marcus in retrospect sees this as an immature and unbalanced phase of his devotion. Yet, the use of the present tense in the beginning of the passage shows that God still is the ultimate concern that is more important than financial rewards. It's also important to notice that Marcus' interaction with the transcendent is an ongoing enterprise. It's therefore reasonable to assume that this sense of being called is renewed through participation in ecclesial and personal rituals in which Marcus is having his secret time with God. This means that spirituality, understood as Marcus' relation to the sacred, may be regarded as an independent variable that both constitutes and renews Marcus' transformational commitments and his identity as a servant.